person and get them engaged. They're not shy. And I leave the floor to you. So thank you again,
Cool.
everyone, and have a great session.
Awesome. Thank you so much. And yeah, I've been kind of doing these things every quarter or every 2 quarters with Hype Sports Innovation, and I'm thrilled to continue to be able to help out over there. And yeah, I think you said 30 years of experience within marketing. It
No, no,
started.
13,
Oh,
13.
13. Okay, cool.
That's
Because
my,
that would.
that's my Israeli. That's something.
Okay, cool. Yeah, it's. I mean, I feel like I've been marketing my whole life, but yeah. So a couple of other things about me. Basically, I call myself a mentor, startup junkie, technical marketer, growth hacker. I have a lot of strong opinions throughout this, so please take them with a grain of salt. It's one opinion. I've been building some of the fastest growing businesses out here. So all 4 companies that I stepped in as the leader within the marketing had an exit within the last 4 years, and it's because of growth hacking. So 1 IPO, 2 acquisitions, and 1 merger within just under 5 years is pretty darn good. I've run pitch workshops, competitions. I've sat on judge panels. I dig this stuff, and I hope it comes off. If I seem a little intense, it's because I'm really into it. I've also won a competition. It was the Unicorn Battle Scandinavia, which was basically like 5 of the Nordic countries. Out of 200 startups, I got first place. So like, I'd like to think I know what I'm talking about. These are some of my different companies, and I'll kind of go into some of the different ways that these work throughout the pitching and stuff later. But Growth Secrets is my online masterclass. Clint is my growth hacking agency. So if you're looking to learn this stuff fast, Growth Secrets. If you're looking for an agency, holler at your boy. This is kind of what we're trying to get to eventually, which is these really nice growth models. And these are some of the companies that I've scaled. But my goal for today is to provide value. I want to make sure that everybody comes out of this learning something new and is able to apply practical tips, tricks, hacks throughout the process. And it's a lot of the stuff that I really wish I had learned in the earliest stages. I have a really good feel for what you guys are kind of positioned as and where you're moving. So yeah, normally that would be the interactive part of this. I promise I'll try to keep it interesting. I move really fast. So if you're missing stuff, they are recording this, but if you want the slides within the chat, I've basically given you my LinkedIn URL. Connect with me and just put a little note that says, hey, I saw you speak, awesome, or whatever. So there is no one size fits all for this. I've sat through so many different workshops within accelerators as an attendee and as a speaker, and everybody is basically contradicting everybody else. So one piece of advice will be completely the opposite from what somebody else is saying. You must do this. So just take that as a grain of salt. My perspective is just my perspective, but remember, I'm a founder too. And I'm currently running a growth hacking agency, a SaaS startup called Architecture Quote, and I'll show some stuff on that later. But yeah, I'm with you guys. So I may end up saying some things that might come off a little edgy. It's my perspective. That's it. One of the biggest theories that I want you to really change the way that you think is removing this robotic thinking of I have to do things from zero. I'm going to show all kinds of different ways that you can do stuff and also give you resources that you can pick up and run with automatically. You don't need to reinvent everything from zero. So clean templates, clean structures, clean processes, save time, reduce the lessons that you have to learn the hard way. One of the biggest ways that you can do that is creating your pitch deck off of a template. There are tons of pitch deck templates that exist out there. Start looking at the ones that actually received money, right? The ones that got somebody funding are the ones that you want to emulate because you know they work. It's point, set, and match. It's proven. So Envato Elements, Creative Market, or even Canva, quite frankly, all have usable templates that you can pull in and make something beautiful without having to be a designer. But pretty much the internet is at your fingertips. You can find tons and tons of different resources. And by the way, all of these are links to actual pitch decks or lists of pitch decks. So you can like look at these things and go, oh, that's how they did like the kind of value add statement, or this is how they suggested what their revenue model was. Like, hell yeah, it's publicly available. Go for it. So start using those before you go to just build something from scratch. Again, throw out like the robotic marketing stuff. And anything that's not in here, you can find on YouTube, you can Google search, And some of my favorite resources have been Y Combinator and 500 Startups, but that's just me. You might have your own kind of favorite, list of resources and stuff. So some mental prep. Again, I go into some different areas, but I need you to understand where I'm coming from with the marketing slash founder mindset and then investors. So take this on for size. 8% of UK VCs have worked in a startup. That means 92% of the people that you'll sit across from have never worked in one, have never been a founder, have never run a small business, much less been employed by one. You're looking at more than 70% of them either coming from finance, mergers and acquisitions, or the remainder is people that did management consulting, which is like you don't know my industry at all, and that's okay. They're going to be impatient and busy. They're likely a bit older, which means you have to use larger fonts. They are self-grandiose. They think that they know everything because they've written checks for a lot of really expensive things. They're very familiar with pitch decks, which means you have to give them something that they've seen before or something that they can draw into. You can't break the mold when it comes to these people. They're not technical. They're never sole contributors, meaning they've never been a developer or a growth hacker or a founder, most of them. They're not familiar with your industry jargon. So if you're using a lot of jargon that your mom isn't going to understand or your neighbor, then they're probably not going to get it either. And they don't understand how desperate you are to get funding, so be aware that these are not the people that maybe you're imagining they are. They don't know anything about what your world is. So I've sat through all these crazy meetings with different investors from either the standpoint of networking or pitching them or being on different judge panels with them. And some of the shit that these guys say, it makes my blood boil. So I don't know if anybody's ever seen the movie Saving Private Ryan, after the guys get through the beach and they're going through dog tags and they're looking through, one of them's got a hole in it. It's like, oh, he's not going home. And they have all these new recruits walking right by the table, and one of the guys freaks out. It's like, hey, look at what you're doing. It was the same feeling for me, these guys telling stories about why they said no to startups. So these are some of the sillier reasons that I can recall investors saying no to startups. Kind of flippantly, as if it was like, I said no because his call was on mute for the first 10 seconds, or they were a minute late, or they went 10 seconds over a pitch, or the call dropped and it took a minute to get them back on, or they didn't hear my specific question. These are the things that I would expect out of frustrated teenage girls, but not investors. And so we really have to place our mind into what are these people really looking for, and what is it that we can do to kind of match expectations. I had one of the most frustrating times pitching a couple of investors over at Slush, which is a big startup conference in Europe. And I could tell the guy's eyes were glazing over as I was running through my slides. And you'll see I move very quickly and I run through slides. And I could tell he was not with me. And so I was like, is everything all right? He's like, no, it's just a lot of information, these words. And so I was like, well, if I put my pitch on the back of a cereal box, like a fucking child, would you read it? And they're like, yeah, do you have that version? I'm like, oh, this is unbelievable. And the reality is I didn't match the expectations of the investors. That's why they didn't invest in me. And that's why you can actually meet those expectations. What they're looking for and what they look at you as right now is potentially cattle. You're a potential moneymaker for them. That's it. You're an investment. And they need to see whether or not you're going to be that version of what they've imagined in their head as to something that's worth investing in. This is not a sales pitch. It's not a marketing pitch, and it's certainly not a school project. This is something very different. When we go on these first dates, it's very similar because our expectations of what we want out of an investor is, I really need you to be the person that's going to give me money right now. And with them, it's I need you to be the investment that I'm going to make over the span of potentially years in order to recoup my value. So they're looking at evaluating, do I understand the idea? Am I excited about the idea? Do I like the team, which is actually a bigger thing than most people think? And are you different? And that's a whole different category of stuff, but I'm going to get back into it later. So one of the larger VCs that are out there is basically Anderson Horowitz. And basically, if you look on the right side, those are some of their biggest investments, really major players. And these guys broke down how many startups they're evaluating on a regular basis. 4,000 submissions a year on average, 3,000 get reviewed, which if you're doing a 50-week of the year working structure and you're working 5 days a week, then it's roughly 12 startups per day. And that's a lot. And so, the good news is, like, the deal of a lifetime comes around all the time. And there will be more chances, many more. You will screw up 1,000 of these things, but there's thousands more investors waiting to meet you. And you will get better the more that you do this, I promise. And you'll learn a lot more about the way that people kind of gravitate towards certain things, but you have to be perceptive. And every no gets you closer to a yes. The reality is you're going to screw up a lot of this stuff, and that's okay. It's your first one or first five, or maybe it's your first time from not doing it for a while, but it's something to bear in mind. So for those that have hired people, if you've ever actually looked at resumes, you start skipping them pretty quickly. So the average recruiter claims that they spend 7.4 seconds reviewing individual resumes, which means you don't have very long to get like a real good presence in front of these people before they're like, done, next, forget it. So it's the same thing with these guys. They're constantly looking at what amounts to a resume, but it's a pitch deck. And you only have to tick one of the boxes for these guys for you to be thrown out. The average review time of an individual pitch deck from an investor is anywhere from 1:35 to 4 minutes and 10 seconds. There's a great little video that I've linked in this presentation, but in the essence of time, I'm going to move on. But just know that it's really, really short. So story time. I was on a startup judge panel out in Luxembourg, and it was the first one that there was like a really big prize. So 50,000 euros went to the number one startup. So they sent me 160 AI companies, startups, basically 100 logistics startups, and they gave me 5 different areas to score with some short notes, and it was just me and 4 other judges. And so I started going through these things, and man, there was a lot to review, but I figured 260 startups times about 3 minutes to review each one will be 13 hours. Boy, was I wrong. Because I thought, like, this is my chance to be the investor or the judge that I always wanted to have on the other side, which is somebody that, like, read, somebody that looked at the stuff. Like, this is our lives. This is what we've spent months in the making, if not years. And I started getting super annoyed. Like, you would run into incomplete sentences, broken links, images that didn't load, too much text everywhere, awful aesthetics of stuff that really doesn't belong in a PowerPoint presentation in the 90s, certainly not in 2020. So it was one of those really crazy things where I was like, oh, this is what it is. This is what that infuriating thing comes from, the investor mindset. I just wanted to impart that onto you guys to realize we're building something for them, not for us. And we really have to separate ourselves from it in order to be successful. So getting enough time at bats, or it's a more American analogy, enough chances to practice is incredibly important. And there are tons of different places to get that. I mean, honestly, just Google search, but there's accelerators, incubators, pitch competitions, demo days, angel investor networks, investor matchmaking, conferences in person and online, university competitions, local and online startup community newsletters. All of these things can be Google searched, and you could literally do a pitch a day for the next year. There are that many. And by the way, there's also resources available across LinkedIn, and do a quick Google search, you'll find it for any list of your imagining. So this is one that I captured the other day, which is basically 2,000 VC and private equity firms that invest in early stage startups. And great, so now I potentially have a list of people I can reach out to. There's a lot of ways that I can streamline that. One of the fastest ways to get into pitch competitions is to create this really long master answer sheet. If you do 1 or 2 applications, you'll start to kind of see the same stuff. So what I do is I fill out 2 or 3 of those, get a really long one going, and make sure that all the assets are easily accessible, and then I'll either have an intern or a virtual assistant applying full time to make sure I'm sitting in front of investors nonstop, so that I'm able to reach the right types of people, I'm getting enough practice in, and no matter what, I'm reaching at scale a number of more, competitions than anybody else that's kind of within my general vicinity. Do read the requirements. I think it's one of those crazy things. Y Combinator claims that of the groups that are good enough to make the interviews, more than half blow the application. That's more of that kind of holier than thou investor mindset, and you're going to encounter that wherever you go. Attention to detail is important, but I'm going to leave that there. I will show the investor outreach for email and LinkedIn. I think it's incredibly important, but just know that the process is pretty much the same. You get your slides in front of somebody. The first pitch meeting takes place, then maybe a slight discussion afterwards. Then they'll invite in a partner for a second meeting. They basically will ask you more questions. They'll then say that they want to do review and due diligence. And if everything checks out, then you basically go into closing and signing the deal. That's normally how it goes, and I'll explain timetables later, but real quick, I want to show investor outreach at scale. Again, if I move too fast, I apologize. It's just it's how I'm wired. But this is the process that works, and there's tools in here. Connect with me on LinkedIn if you want the slides. So we're going to target, discover, do email validation, and make sure that we run outreach all in one smooth flow. And the idea behind this is basically there is no twitch, there is no stutter step, there is no chance to lose stuff when you have a super smooth process. And you'll find that processes are kind of what I'm all about, but first we do targeting. So we're going after angel investors, accelerators, incubators, pre-seed, whatever. You can read. So the idea is that I want to separate the different messaging for each of these groups and test out different email campaigns to anywhere from 50 to 100 at a time. You don't always want to burn the same kind of group a bunch of times, but people are forgetful. Within a month or two, they're not going to remember whether or not they got your email. So it's basically kind of an endless loop of this stuff. All you need in order to get in touch with these people is a first name, job title, and sometimes that's not even important with investors, and work emails, or the email that you can reach them on. All the tools on the right side are basically enrichment tools. My favorite is Snovio. I'm starting to kind of take a shining to Apollo, but yeah, they all work reasonably well, and it allows you to find anybody's email that's at a company that's fairly big, so more than a couple of employees. Might not work so well with family offices and angel investors. Then you have to verify emails. We have to know that the email we're reaching out to isn't going to bounce and hit the spam folder, which ultimately will lead your domain to being blacklisted. So we run some of these tools. My favorite is Clear Out, but those other ones are varying degrees of okay. Then if you're really going next level, and this is where you might want to work with an agency like mine, we would create burner domains so that your main domain isn't affected. You create email warmups, which basically is like making it look like your email is sending, receiving, and replying to emails, so Google doesn't basically go, don't let that email get into anybody's inbox ever again. You attach basically all the MX records, DMARC, SPF, and DKIM to these specific emails. I'm getting way too nerdy. Holler at your boy if you want to learn how to do that. Then it's outreach. Outreach, we need to send 1 to 2 emails. Usually it's the first email and a follow-up. Investors are very temperamental when it comes to this stuff. So usually the first email goes out immediately. The second email follows up in 2 to 3 days, which basically is to the effect of, hey, I don't know if you saw my first email. It's this, this, and this. And that's the idea. This video is linked, and I think this is probably one of the more impressive breakdowns from a VC as to what they like to see in cold email outreach. And this guy admits, like, yep, I look at cold email outreach all the time. I have invested in companies that have emailed me from out of the blue. It's okay to do it, but here's what you do. So it needs to take less than 60 seconds for them to read. Again, like busy, not big readers. The problem you're solving, your solution, progress, like is it in like alpha or pre-launch mode? Are you beta? Do you have revenue coming in? Some of the market size, co-founders, technical staff, unfair advantage is a big sexy one, and I'll go into that stuff later. Don't send a wall of text. Skimmability, super important. Keep it short, not your life story. Never ask for an NDA up front. That's crazy. Oh, and a couple of other little tools that I think are really helpful. Calendly and Streak. Streak allows you to see when people have opened in the city that they're in. Calendly is a meeting booking tool, but there's like tons of other tools that do that. All right, so creating your pitch deck. And I'm doing fairly well on time, so I'm just going to steamroll right ahead and then save time for questions. So, have you read every sentence so far? Every sentence that was written in this presentation? Yeah, probably not, and I don't blame you because one, I moved way too fast, but there's a good chance that you were actually just kind of listening and looking at some of the visuals, but you weren't reading every single line, and that's the way that your pitch decks should look. The reason that mine have so many different line items is because I want them to be standalone. So even if somebody doesn't hear me speak, they're going to be able to take my slides and be able to use them pretty much as a standalone. Your pitch deck is not that. And the goal of your pitch deck is quite simple. And for the record, this is kind of what your pitch deck should look like. No distractions, no fun gifts, like fucking super simple. So it needs to be simple, legible, so like the people sitting in the back, if you're pitching in person, or the people that have bad eyesight can read everything, and don't go nuts with, yeah, crazy thin fonts. Just keep it clear. And you need to take yourself out of the equation. I know I mentioned that earlier, but it's so difficult because it's the thing that we've built. And I'll show a couple of different ways that you can go about doing that. But it's so difficult to be like, no, but I've spent so many hours. Like, I know, but that's not the game that we're playing. The game that we're playing is I need to make sure that the person who's sitting across from me on this date happens to like me for the things that they're looking for, not necessarily immediately me for the person that I actually am, which is a bit counterintuitive, but that's what it is, because this is for investors. This is not for potential clients in the future. I don't know. I've already kind of touched on that. You guys get it. Things to avoid. Ambiguity. So that means like any type of vague stuff that isn't really necessary. Overly complex stuff, like you guys saw when I was going through like the burner domain stuff. I didn't even have to like sit in front of people. I'm like, no, I don't think people are going to get that. If I was doing a presentation for other growth hackers, they'd be like, oh, of course. But maybe not. Remove mystery that isn't like, will we be successful? I'll explain what that means later. And then jargon. And I've already kind of talked about jargon, but it's going to be a consistent thing that I kind of mentioned. It needs to be there. One of the things that I think a lot of people misconstrue with building a startup pitch deck is that there needs to be a connection from the standpoint of how somebody remembers what you do and how they remember the problem that you're solving. And so a lot of the companies that have become these unicorns are really easy to describe in less than a sentence, like a fraction of a sentence. And we need to start thinking about the way that we do that from a really high level in order for it to resonate with the people, remember what we're about throughout the entire 3 minutes that you might have to maintain their attention. And it's just a completely different muscle that we're moving here. So like, I love this quote, which is like, legible ideas are understood by people who know zero about your business. So if you think of the real successful startups, again, it's the ones that didn't need a huge additional explanation of what they do. You're selling the benefit or the outcome or the dream of what your startup is about, not necessarily the technology behind it, not necessarily the team behind it, but the message, the story, and basically what your value proposition really is. And I'll show a couple of different versions of that in a minute, but think about it like this. What exactly, or what are you making? What is the real problem that you're solving? And who is the customer? And if we continue to have that in mind as we shape this really weird thing that, again, isn't a marketing presentation, isn't a sales presentation, it is a deck that's supposed to get you a lot of money in order to get access to more money, we have to think of it differently. Avoid the why. Like, so let's say you're making sustainable coffee beans. Like, dude, you don't need to tell me why. Like, I get it. Like, I can connect the dots. And so can investors. Or the how, when it's really not that interesting and it doesn't have anything to do with anything, you don't need to go into such detail. It's the same thing that you saw with me explaining this burner domain thing. Just say that, it's important to not have your email go into the spam folder. Just do what you're going to do, that kind of thing. Stay on the path, keep it simple, stay clear. So this is the high concept part of this, which I think a lot of people struggle with because we're so close to the project. And I don't have any really good anecdotes for how to get away from it other than to show where it exists in the wild. So it's an oversimplification of what your startup actually does. So like Hollywood movies are really good at this. So if I said Jaws in space, like you have a frame of reference, like, okay, I've heard of Jaws, yeah. If it were in space, yeah, it'd be the movie Alien, right? It's kind of like Jaws and sort of. Another example, so like a bus with a bomb. And if you haven't seen this movie, it is a winner, still is, Speed, right? So like you know exactly what somebody's referring to and they get it before you actually have to say the exact name. And you want that type of resonance in terms of the idea of what you're building to click immediately with the investors, because not only do they feel smart for figuring it out, but they also feel like they know what your trajectory is and they can envision in their own mind's eye what you're going to be. Water dinosaur versus giant gorilla. yeah, Godzilla versus Kong, right? Like we can all do these. So there's a few different versions of what these look like from the standpoint of startups, and these aren't as fun, but I wanted to show a couple of different examples that really work. So the first customer survey built with artificial intelligence to measure decisions. It's not my favorite thing, but I do start to kind of understand who are the customer, who's it for, and basically what you do. Let's take a different one. So Finova, transforming the future of finance from affordable, inclusive lending to democratized investing on the blockchain. I still think it's a wordful or a mouthful, but it is a lot clearer from the standpoint of who the audience is, what it is, what's the noun in here, and ultimately, yeah, the industry and the type of technology that you're using behind this. Like, I get it. And by the way, all of these have a link to the pitch deck, so you get the rest of the slides. Yeah, if you connect with me on LinkedIn, but in any event. So like one that I think we've all heard of, Dropbox, synchronizes files across you or your, that should be you, teams and computers. We get the idea, like it comes super clean and it's fast. You need to figure out what the lowest common denominator of understanding is for your product the same way. Airbnb is the first online marketplace that lets travelers book rooms with locals instead of hotels. Got it. Super clear. Lead out of the gates roaring with that. People get it. And sometimes it's just this kind of like figuring out what side of it to hit. But again, like just start thinking about what are you making or what are you actually making? What is the problem or what is the actual problem? And who are your customers? Who are the people that are going to benefit from this? This is the first one that I put together. And like, of course, years later, I'm looking at it, it's like, whoa, that was rough. So yeah, you know, you get a little better and a few iterations later, it's shorter, which is good. And I still think it's too long, but using, this is my company, Architecture Quote, it's still around. But yeah, using AI to help ambitious architecture firms discover and win more projects automatically. So maybe there's a little more mystery there than needs be, and I could certainly try to reinvent the wheel again, but yeah, who has the time? So what does good look like? Guys, I've shown a bunch of different links that I put in there. Like you can find countless online versions on SlideShare or anywhere else of people that have already done this. Please review other people's work before you start doing it. It's like trying to invent dancing if you've never seen somebody dance in real life. Like, please don't do that. Review some award-winning slides. That way you know what you're kind of building from. Again, I know I've mentioned this before, but clear, concise, compelling, like all of that really matters because that's what investors are expecting to see. Build what they want, not what you want. So some of the most important slides to have in there, this will change depending on the industry, depending on the solution, but those are kind of the cornerstone of the slides that you should have. Many competitions will require you to not go over a certain amount of slides, and I kind of get it because people are lazy and don't want to look at everything, but this is what you need. And yeah, there's plenty of templates associated with this stuff towards the beginning of my presentation. So you have a cover/purpose slide. It basically introduces who you are. There's seconds before you start speaking. There's just a moment to kind of begin the slides where you see the logo, high concept tagline, and then of course your contact details throughout. Beyond that, I mean, there's plenty of examples of people that do exactly this and they've gotten funding. So I would stand to reason that, you know, check the box, like this works. Then maybe your problem slide comes next. Again, there is no specific order in what I've reviewed and the stuff that I've built myself, but a lot of people put the problem statement as the second slide because that's what you're really trying to solve using your solution. And your problem slide should be real, the problem should be simple, it has to be relatable, and usually it incorporates some form of a statistic, so something that aggregates numbers that you can say this is a number of people that struggle with this. Popular, growing, urgent, expensive, mandatory, common. That's where problems kind of fall into categories. Not everybody builds one. So if you're building, again, a coffee company, then maybe it doesn't matter that you have some form of problem slide. Like, problem is I'm not drinking enough coffee. It just depends. So take it with a grain of salt. Solution. Show, don't tell. If you are going to use screenshots, which is totally fine, make sure that they're like appropriately zoomed in or out, they're inside of a device. But let's talk about the benefits, not specifically all the features. The benefits of what it results in is what investors want to see. That allows them to visualize. They're not technical people, they won't get your features. There's a slide of the coffee again, so like they don't have features, you know. It's it's kind of like a little different. But for those that are building something technical, it should be fairly straightforward. Why now is fairly important because sometimes there's an industry or a niche that has had either slow disruption or has been disrupted multiple times. To show that you understand the historical significance behind your timing is incredibly important, and the scalability within that. And there's lots of different companies that can spend multiple slides on that. Sometimes not, just depends on your startup and your niche. The market size is really important. The investors want to see that you've done your own due diligence. So your total addressable market, TAM. That is a really loose equation because most of the time you can't find it. You can find like small elements of like multiples that you can kind of build from. So if you're building, I don't know, let's say something for like, this is such a bad example. Your rear view mirror, like I want to build like a little thing that hangs on top of it in a car, then I need to figure out how many people own cars within my target market, how many people would potentially be able to afford my product, and so on and so forth. There's a lot of great ways to do this, and the idea is to basically say this is our total market, this is the location that we're currently targeting, these are the people or number of customers that we would stand to be there, and these are the numbers of people that we're probably going to close within the first year, so on and so forth. Moving along, this is what a bunch of those kind of numbers look like. Like people keep it real thin. Like you don't see a lot of sentences on here. Nobody's doing full sentences. Please don't do that. Nobody needs full sentences. Like just throw the number in there. They're gonna get it. Like I promise they'll get it. You don't have to put the training wheels on for investors. Of all the people, they're gonna get it. So traction is really tough when you're pre-seed. So that's sales, retention, letter of intent, number of users. If you've gotten any news coverage, like money raised so far, if it's, fools, friends, and family, personal investments, like they want to see that you've put stuff, anything that can show some form of traction. If you don't have direct sales and you can't show that month over month growth, there's a million different ways to kind of show that you have some form of traction. And by the way, a lot of companies are getting, a lot of carpets. A lot of startups are getting investment right now just on the idea, which is friggin' absurd to me, but it's happening. So just showing that you have a letter of intent or you have a couple of companies that are trying out your product means that there is some market validation there, which is incredibly important. If you're a more technical company and you have a patent pending, put that down. They want to know that. If it's some special technology, it's hardware, put it down. Competition is really important because this is what they always ask kind of in like the rapid fire questions. A lot of these pitches will be 3-minute pitch, 3-minute rapid fire questions, which, man, it goes fast. And I wish I could spend like a whole day just doing a presentation on that. But one of the things that you want to twist into this is, I know who my competitors are, but here's what these shitheads don't have. It's the unfair advantage that is you. And your key differentiator should be your unfair advantage, and your customer stories can bring these out as well. So like unfair advantage is one of these like really cool elements that gets investors all hot and bothered. So it can be the uniqueness of the founding team. You're a 1 in a million, 1 in 10 that has worked in this industry for years and nobody knows it better than you. You could have a way that you're able to capture the first 10% of the market because either it's super niche or you've tapped into something already. Your product is already moving faster than what currently exists, or maybe your cost of acquisition is 0 and you're already bringing on tons of users. There's so many different ways to do it, but that's what investors are looking for, that little little sizzle at the top. That's what that is. And if you can find that, you're going to get investors asking questions about it. Just be prepared to answer one. And you should have a reason for why you're better than your competitors, because it does feel like a lot of the investors that I've met with are just sitting there trying to poke holes, and I kind of get it, that's their job. But you need to kind of have these pivots or triggers that you're ready to pull. So this is one that I always got questions about because I didn't have a clear or clean enough slide. How are you going to make money? Like if I'm going to give you money, how are you going to get money back to me? Pick one revenue model as opposed to 5, as opposed to some convoluted crazy thing. These are screen captures of different revenue model slides. Do not overcomplicate it. Do not go full sentences because you know they're not going to read it. It's incredibly important. And some of the other things about net cash burn I'll go into in a minute. So the revenue projections is something that you really need in your financial deck. That's again a whole different presentation, but we're talking about cost or unit economics. So like how much it will actually cost you to stay in business, what your margins are for every transaction or purchase. And then basically all we're doing is like removing or deleting, revenue minus expenditure. And that's what's left over. And how much money do you need in order to grow this as fast as possible? I did include basically like a nice little top-down video in here that somebody explains super cleanly how to do that. I think it's really interesting. So like everybody puts out like these silly ass astronomical numbers for like first year we're gonna grow by like $1 billion, and it's like, all right, settle down. Like there are so many documented like analysis out there that show the first year on average you're looking at 178% growth. So just make your numbers match that. The second year, over the span of the year, you're going to double growth again, 100% growth. And then by the third year, you're going to kind of slow it to 71%. This is from a revenue model, and this does make sense even though it seems like it's in reverse. Because let's say you get your first customer for $10, first day of the first year, then let's say you get your second customer on the second day, then that means that you have instantly doubled your revenue in 2 days. So it's the same kind of thing. Like you should be working really hard to get the sales numbers up. So please take it from that mindset, not any other crazy thing that you might be imagining. I have no idea. So the team is really important. Every investor that I talk to, and honestly, it's their perspective, it's fine. But they're like, oh, it's the most 3 important things I'll ever invest in is people, people, and people. It's like, thanks, dude, appreciate it. And what else? The reality is you have to show faces and you want to show some relevant experience. You'll see that a lot of companies do this, and it's okay to do that. You can list previous companies that you've worked at that maybe give you an edge. Maybe it's your school. If you went to fucking Stanford, congratulations. No offense who did. Anybody that did, I didn't get a chance to go. I didn't get in. But yeah, it's one of those weird Eastern European things. Please smile. Like people love that. And unless you're like a really like hard edge, like security company, we got to be serious, then yeah, like smile. It really does warm people up. So the last little bit, and I still have some time, is the ask. So you really need to stipulate like how much you're looking for. And I don't know, people get really nervous about this or don't know how to calculate it. You need to figure out the runway that you need between 12 and 18 months. Because that's normally what a pre-seed round is going to last you, and sometimes it can be shorter, sometimes a little longer. But the average amount in USD from the EU is 386,000. So make your math add up to that number so you don't stand out outlandishly or you don't look ridiculous trying to kind of put it together if you just have no idea what you're doing. But some of the other slides have guides that I've linked to that should be helpful. The median is kind of like if you were to use a box and whisker chart, then that would be 150K, which is fairly low compared to like US investments, but that's pretty on track. And then top quartile is 410. But you definitely see pre-seed rounds that have gone like well over $1 million. It's just crazy. So a few more thoughts, just some like general ideas and things to bear in mind, and then I'll pause for questions. So the pre-seed fundraising timelines, the average is about 12 weeks. So that's meetings with different investors, that's going back and forth. And just because somebody signed something doesn't mean you're going to get the money in your bank account within the next week. A lot of this stuff is just spread way out, and it's frustrating. So just remember, like, that's the average. But there's plenty of people that it's taken 19, 20, 30 weeks. It's a long run. So just be aware that, nothing happens overnight. Now, I'm sure there's an example of a company that got it, pitched in the morning, got it at night. I have no idea. That hasn't been my experience. That's all I'm saying. So the order can change of these slides. I think one of the hardest things as founders is that we get a chip on our shoulder. I certainly do. When we get feedback, and I have learned to iterate and kind of plant myself to the side and only understand like this is coming from my lack of clarity. And so I've created different types of pitch decks. I've tested the pitch decks. Some of the best tests that I've done are people that are completely outside of my industry. So that could be parents, that could be neighbors, non-industry friends, strangers. It's people that you have to explain this at like a very casual setting, and they're able to kind of like follow along and get it. And then ask them afterwards, can you tell me what my company does? And write down everything they say, because that's probably going to be better and more usable in the long run than what you're sitting there kind of like having all these whiteboard sessions and post-it notes and all that. Sometimes the hardest thing that we have to do is separate ourselves from the project that we've spent so much blood, sweat, and tears on. I've been there, and I think it's important to really crystallize that with feedback. And nothing is written in stone when it comes to your deck, when it comes to the financial models, when it comes to it's called pivoting, right? So like, there's just no need to be attached to any specific slide or item. And, put your strongest stuff up front. If you feel like you have a really strong like differentiator, then yeah, go for it. Be early with it. Why not? But start figuring out what people keep asking you. And that was one of the things that I realized, like people kept asking me about my financial model, and I realized like my financial model is terrible and that slide does not provide any clarity. There's a reason why they ask. And practice. So like I practiced backwards and forwards just to like screw myself up. I did so many of these different pitch competitions that ultimately I could see a slide from afar and be like, that's where I talk about this thing and I run this sentence. You don't have to memorize. You just know what you need to kind of say or the general vicinity you need to be in for each kind of visual that comes up. And I mean, honestly, at this point, you could wake me up from a drunken sleep and I could probably start reciting whatever page of my pitch deck you pulled up for architecture quote right in front of me. But it's because I've done it so many times. And you can do that too. It's just, it feels kind of silly. And maybe if you have other founders with you, try letting them pitch and then you pitch. Never do one of those, I'm going to do the first 5 slides and then Sarah's going to do the next 5. Please don't do that. It's super cringy and it never works. Like, you guys can both try to switch on and off with your co-founders. But yeah, super cringy. So questions from investors. I've learned the hard way not to get defensive. So, it's like, why do you need the money? It's like, I don't know, because I like being broke. Like that's not a good answer. So if they're trying to get you riled up or they're trying to turn something about your presentation into a negative, you have to try to use a little bit of that judo move of basically turning it into a positive. So, what are you going to do with the money? It's like, well, I mean, obviously we've been planning this for a really long time. We're really excited to start putting money towards all the things that we've set in motion since the beginning. You're not actually saying anything. It just kind of sounds like that. But you should have enough of these questions coming at you over a long enough span of time that you're ready for anything that gets thrown at you. It's usually like the same 5 questions you get every time, so like don't sweat it. And if you do, I don't know, 5 to 10 of these competitions, you'll know what's coming next. So just don't get defensive. It's the worst thing you can do because it immediately turns off the judge panel and the investors, and it's really hard to overcome that later. So turn every negative into like a momentum thing where we're building this and we're really excited. So in closing, I know I've covered a ton of mindset stuff. I wonder if there's an investor in this group, because yeah, I'm sure that they would probably disagree immensely with my summary of what I think of investors, but c'est la vie. I've given a ton of resources. Again, if you want the slides, holler at your boy. How to find investors is there, how to reach out, and a ton of different things on the pitch deck. Again, you've seen that I've simplified my presentation. I've even slowed it down the same way that you guys should be doing your pitches. The last little thing about paying the bills, I run growthsecrets.org. It's my online masterclass, continuing to kind of revamp that on a regular basis. I do run a growth hacking agency and digital marketing agency. We've helped startups get funding. We've scaled startups, and I work with large organizations too, but obviously my heart's in this stuff. Like I dig this. So yeah, that's that. And connect with me on LinkedIn, but I've saved about 10 minutes for questions. So fire away.
Okay, yeah, let me start. First off, amazing energy. I'm Sven from Tropos AR, and the one thing I was kind of I didn't see coming was don't add your why, because like the whole, I don't know if you know Simon Sinek. I've worked with Simon when I was at PlayStation when they screwed up the launch of the PlayStation 3. So he was then still at the American agency, and I saw what later became the golden rule. So how does your insight matches with like the golden rule, and do start with why? Like do you mean not elaborate too much on your why,
Yeah,
or
yeah,
get it?
exactly that. So, you know, the why in many cases does have to be explained of why this is important. So, you know, I think it's a case by case basis. It's not so much the why from the standpoint, I'm trying to get people to focus on the benefits and the simplest summation of like what you're actually building and kind of the who's it important for, kind of the more end results, as opposed to putting in a bunch of fluff that maybe doesn't actually provide any value. It's really case by case, unfortunately, but really good point. And again, that's what I've said about contradictions. So like, I might directly contradict Simon Sinek, and I think the dude's brilliant. So I don't know. He's got more PhDs on the wall than I do, so maybe take his advice versus mine.
Uh, One more follow-up question, because we have a lot of, well, like what we do in AR is a big leap forward. It's like a future which is yet to be built. And we have a lot of problems in getting people just to visualize what we do. And like we've become pretty good in the on the pitch deck side to having like doing it with images and all that. But right now we've actually taken the whole explanation of what the future would be out of the pitch deck and turn it into a 2-minute video, but we're not sure. Do we send it in advance? Do we I hate adding it to a pitch deck, because then like you break the whole energy. How would you tackle that problem?
Yeah, so like I've sat through, I won't name the investor, but he's a big one out in DC, and like he basically berated a startup for playing their explainer video in the middle of their presentation. And it was like a really good explainer video. I'm like, all right, like whatever. But they don't want that, and that can be really frustrating. So there's a few different ways to do that. You can use GIFs, which you saw kind of moving throughout my presentation. That can be enough, but ultimately, sometimes you have a product that can only be justified visually. You know, how do you explain what you're really getting out of your production without showing it? You know, there's a contradiction for every example. I've found with some of the clients that I've had that are within AR that you need to show the users either enjoying it or the users that are creating their own versions of whatever it is that is your SDK or kind of what you're building. So really just depends. But it's a super hyper visual thing. So I don't know, fuck them. Like let them be all bummed out because you showed a video of something that works. Like if it makes an investor get what you're trying to say, then it's all right.
Okay, yeah, well, we'll test run a lot of times before we are in front of actual investors. Like, amazing presentation. I'm going to leave the rest up to the other participants here. And then there's complete silence. Okay, guys, go.
I mean, if there's something more specific to an industry or specific to investor questions, like I'm happy to go in any direction.
Taylor. Mm-hmm. Hi, sorry. Good morning. I have a question for you. You're talking about an investor being a little older, who's probably never run a startup and never been an entrepreneur, et cetera, et cetera. Where have they got their success from? In other words, what is their background and how have they accumulated their wealth? And I have to tell you, giggling like a frustrated teenager was absolutely hysterical. Thank you for making my morning.
Oh, thanks. Yeah, I mean, so if you want to find people that have a really unique and interesting life background, go to a vineyard or like a winery. The people that start those types of businesses, I've met guys that were jet fighters, like pilots, and guys that were working as like a clown in a circus. Like it's all over the place. A lot of musicians too. But most of them come from, as I had mentioned before, it's a lot of finance. So larger banking finance types of career fields and backgrounds, a lot more mergers and acquisitions than you would expect. which is definitely like a good old boys network. And then the other kind of side of that is management consulting. So KPMG, Deloitte, Booz. I'm drawing a blank right now.
So really what you're telling us is we should screw the idea of being a startup and an entrepreneur and go get into the financial sector.
Yeah, who told you this was lucrative? What, Zuckerberg? Yeah, I mean, like, unfortunately, it's such a bummer. Yeah, but you know, like, the difference is, like, yeah, I have a dickhead of a boss. Like, it's this guy, and he makes me work all the time. But I know that I'd rather work for this guy because I think he's a bit more reasonable with the way that he runs his business. He gives a shit about the people that's underneath him, and yeah, like, it's not the most stressful thing that I could be doing, which is being in a situation where I'm constantly wondering, what if I had gone and done my own thing, or what would have happened if I had actually put some time into something that I gave a shit about? Like, you're not necessarily going to make tons of money in the initial period. There's that dip that's, I can't remember who wrote the book on that. It's called The Dip. But yeah, people do reasonably well, and most people don't nail it on their first go around. I imagine there's plenty of people here that are on their second, third, or sixth startup. Like, there's some craziness.
Absolutely. Startups are addictive, and so is being an entrepreneur. And I assure you, I work for the same bitch, and she's the one that lives in my head.
I love it. Yeah, very cool. Any other thoughts or questions?
Do you have any, it's Vanessa, sorry. Do you have any tips for the actual presentation day? Like, you're standing there, you know your company, but now you're racked with, nerves or, any tips that we can use that will help us in that moment, that presentation moment?
Yeah, so like there's a couple of things. I always try to go first to get it out of the way, and you're also more memorable when you're on the very first or you're towards the very end. The problem with going at the end is that like you start thinking about like, oh shit, like he said this thing, and now you start trying to change your stuff on the fly, which is a really bad idea. So yeah, the startup competition that I won, I literally turned up 30 seconds before I was supposed to go, and I was second to last. I hadn't seen anybody else, and that works for me. Some people thrive on the adrenaline rush. I get the tunnel vision when I first get on stage a lot of times, and I've gotten less of that when I practice a lot because it takes away some of the pressure. But ultimately, it's just doing like these. Like I can do webinars backwards and forwards now because like, dude, I'm just talking into my own presentation. I don't even see you guys. But I guarantee you when I get back in front of a crowd, it'll probably be a little more of that adrenaline and rush. And you just have to remember, like, it's going to be over before you know it. You're going to fuck up a couple of things. Like, you're never perfect, which I get so frustrated. It's like, damn, I wish I had mentioned that one thing in the slide. And you do a bunch of these and realize that, like, yeah, that one was a little better. That one was a little worse. If you don't have any sleep, it's way worse. And I would say, like, your first few are always really bad. So I would just practice on like the big ones that you don't care about, or try to get into as many of these as possible, just so you can get it out of the way. Like I do that with job search stuff. Like back in the day, I would take job interviews. It's like, do you want to be a garbage man? It's like, fuck yeah, because I haven't talked about myself in forever. So then you're practicing. It's like, okay, you got the job. It's like, yeah, dude, I'm not going to be a garbage man. Like, forget it. But it was a good chance for me to practice. And I think that's important for you as well. Like, you don't need to actually get investment from every investor. So yeah, I mean, you'll feel the pressure.
Thank you.
All right. This is, we should have called the session, the naked truth or something like that, or, Taylor Ryan Raw, like Eddie Murphy, because you had some sort of also a little bit of a very blunt and open, and I really liked it. I think everyone here got it as a very a refreshing, honest and authentic feedback that everyone are experiencing, and that's what makes the difference, at the end. that we are all looking each other in the eye. We're all human beings, and we are looking the truth in the eye and the guts and working accordingly. So on my view, it was fascinating and really very, very hands-on. And I also want to just do a quick follow-up on the last thing you actually now said. You answered to Vanessa. You told it very quickly, but it's a very important point. You don't need to get an investment from anyone. I mean, at the end, it's up to you to decide who you want to get their money. Because with money comes accountabilities, come all kind of things, you know. So that's a very important point. And at the end, we can decide if we want to practice, let's say, on not the investors that we actually want, but we want to trial on them.
Sure.
So once we get to the real investor that we want, then we'll be ready. So I just wanted to, to pinpoint that point. And again, on behalf of everyone here, I want to thank you very much for taking the time for this session and for the very, very hands-on and practical tips. You can see by the amounts of comments in the chat that it was a meaningful session, and I'm sure you get a lot of follow-up. So take the day off just for replying everyone.
Yeah, I wish. Yeah.
I hope you cancel all your meetings. And I just want to also use this opportunity to share one update regarding the upcoming sessions in the next 2 weeks before we'll start the actual pitching session. This is for all of the founders here. So like we had a session with Ryan, we're going to have a couple of additional value sessions next week. We will share with you the timeline, of course. We're now securing great professors, lecturers to do that. And in parallel, you will also have vertical-based sessions, which will be led by the PDs and the lead investors experts in your verticals. And I also encourage you to communicate with your personal mentors, your lead mentors. And one last request, everyone here who hasn't submitted their KPIs yet in the file that we shared with you, please do that. It's mostly for you. It's a part of your management tool to see your progress, and it also helps us to make sure that we are providing the relevant value. If someone has any issue with the technical stuff or something, please contact me directly. Okay, I will be leading this, so everyone knows me. You have my email, WhatsApp, whatever you need. I'm here. Yeah, see, okay, Ziv, no problem. I'll share with you the KPI file again. So again, everyone needs, just send me an email, and I'll take care of that. So thank you very much, everyone. Again, Ryan, well done, man. Well done.
Thanks.
And I hope everyone will have a great later on day.
Cool. Thanks,
Thank you.
guys. I hope it was helpful.
Thank you.
Bye.
Have a good day.
Sure, Patrick, send me an email, please.
Thank you.